Welcome to a new series on this channel where we're comparing two similar albums from a similar time period and similar genre. This time we're going to be discussing the differences between Loveless and Souvlaki. Loveless by My Bloody Valentine and Souvlaki by Slowdive. Just to preface, we're not going to be comparing these in like which is better, nor are we going to be arguing like one person taking a side of one, the other. We both listen to these a lot. These are like some of our favorite albums. So we're just going to be kind of discussing them, the differences, what maybe some do better and then others don't do as well. But overall, it's not like a competitive side to this. It's just like a more analytical side to this because these are albums that we love a lot. So yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I guess this will be the first in a potential series on classic album showdowns. We just wanted to start with Shoegaze because it's one of our favorite genres and because people in the comments did suggest for us to listen to Loveless quite a bit. And well, we're like, yeah, it's a favorite album of ours, so we're going to cover it in some way, and we thought this was a good way to do it. Mm-hmm. As well as Slowdive. No one suggested Slowdive, but great band. And we'll get into what, I guess, similarities they share between My Bloody Valentine. Mm-hmm. So I got both albums here on vinyl, and I'll hand you Souvlaki. Both of these albums are great. Both these albums get classic status in our eyes. So this album came out in 1991, and this one came out in 1993, I believe.
Sounds right. Yeah.
So same era, same genre. It was a popular scene, shoegaze, in the early 90s, late 80s. For those who don't know, it's a genre that really employs a lot of heavy guitar pedals to make kind of a wall of sound, and uses like very subdued vocals behind lots of layers, so you can't really even hear what they're saying. Mm-hmm. A lot of reverb, especially on the drums.
They usually actually put pretty much all the instruments through guitar effects, like drums
and vocals too.
Yeah, so you get like ambient vocals, you got like really distant reverby drums, and then of course you have multiple soaring guitars. There's a lot of diversity, but really what I think separates this genre from all the other genres is just how far they go with all of the guitar effects.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially one of these two albums.
Yeah.
But in general, yeah, like a lot of atmosphere, a lot of reverb, and a lot of texture is important with this music. Even though it's guitar music, it's quite different than your traditional guitar music. Mm-hmm. So the first category that we kind of have to compare these albums is the beauty and expression. The emotion that's transmitted by these albums. Like how well we connect with them and how well I think that they connect to other people who listen to them. And just the level of passion behind these songs, you know? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely think that both of these albums have, despite their very different, I guess, deployment of their like instrumentation and like overall soundstage, where Loveless is very big, dissonant, like distorted. This album is very, you know, almost bleak, very ambient and you know, spacey. But despite that, I do get a very similar, like almost melancholy from both of them, almost like a love longing kind of feeling. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, I find shoegaze to be one of the most romantic genres.
Absolutely.
I don't know, it covers a different type of romance than like jazz, like, you know, the classic saxophone and stuff. Very different type of romance, right?
It's kind of like as you said, like a sense of like melancholy or longing, right? Mm-hmm. Just in these songs, like there's like a deep sadness and depression to this music, but at the same time there's like such a sense of beauty and hope and love, you know, in this music. This album feels more direct in the way that it covers it. Like the songs sound like they're actually being sung to like a lover or an ex-lover. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of like pining and also a lot of like heartbreak in these songs. Think of the song Dagger, for example.
Yeah.
This album, of course, being more abstract in mostly every other way, lyrically, you don't really get much from this because it's so opaque, I guess. Like, it's hard to really understand the lyrics, and that's not the point. They were supposed to be in the background, almost like a soothing voice. But, like, that's just a thing with shoegaze, I think, that, like, some of these songs on Souvlaki are more lucid. Nothing on this album, I would say, is. Loveless is always, like, a hazy fever dream the whole time, but in the nicest way possible. Like, these songs are almost like just a warm blanket just over your senses kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And it lulls you into a state of sort of like deep like lethargy, but in like a very calming way. So I'd say that like while you don't get much lyricism, I think that still what you can get from it in terms of the mood does have that sort of same longing romantic sound, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then I guess you can get that from the song titles as well, you know, with tracks like To Hear Knows When You Sleep, Blown a Wish, you know, like these kind of songs like have this sort of literally Valentine sort of feeling to it, like, you know. But obviously, you know, the band's called My Bloody Valentine. The album's called Loveless. Yeah. I assume it's not supposed to be everything's, you know, dandy, fine and dandy.
Yeah. Well, there are definitely a few songs on there, like Blown a Wish and Soon, that I feel like are way more on the other So okay, I should preface this here. So shoegaze is like a really wide genre, and there are like two ends to it. There's like the noise rock side, and then there's the ambient guitar side, I guess you could say, which is just kind of wash of ambience. And then the other side, so like on the wash of ambient side, the Day Sleepers would be one, and Cockatoo Twins would also be on that side for sure. And then on the other side of things, you'd probably get something like Have a Nice Life. And this band would probably be the most extreme on that end.
I'd say Slowdive kind of sits in the middle, right? Like they have some songs that are very in the one direction,
Yeah,
some
like,
that are quite loud and more rock.
Like Allison and 40 Days are very much on the kind of wall of sound side that side has.
And the Souvlaki Space Station.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
And then some others like Altogether, Melon Yellow, or way on the more dream pop side of things, right?
And Sing too. Sing is probably the most similar song to any Cockatoo Twins song. So yeah, I guess you get best of both worlds in this album. Slowdive's other albums kind of have a lot more diversity. Like Pygmalion is way more on the ambient guitar side.
Just for a Day is more on the noise rock side.
Yeah, for sure.
The new album's like squarely in the middle again.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay, so to answer the first question though, the comparison point, which was beauty and expression, which album do you think kind of like is more about that, versus the other one?
I think that the types of expression they have are very different. Well, like I think this album's more subtle. It's like it's so opaque, but then the more you listen to it, the more you pick out things, and the more you actually like kind of get it. Almost, this album is a little bit more, I guess, in your face. It's a little bit easier to understand and more immediate. Yeah, and because of that, I think this album it can express its themes more clearly. But I think the depth of the themes being expressed are kind of better on this album, just because of the subtlety that they can deploy.
Yeah, and I think that the way like everything kind of works together instrumentally on this album is just so unique in the way that it transmits these like kind of deep emotions that I feel like it's like almost a direct translation of what the artists are feeling to what they're trying to convey in their music.
Yeah, like they don't need lyrics to be the middle person, I guess.
Exactly. Like this album is amazing and very emotional, but in a more conventional way, right? Like it just has, sad lyrics, sad singing, some minor chords, like it's like the more traditional ways you get across melancholy. And this album doesn't need that. Like you can feel it, when you listen to this music.
Yeah, for sure.
So maybe this album, just because it does it in a more inventive way, just conveys that sort of beauty a little better. So yeah. But
it's definitely a different type of expression.
It really is. Yeah. So the next category is a little bit more of an objective one. This one is flow and this sort of like album cohesion, right? That's something that we value quite a bit listening to an album. And I think that both of these albums do a pretty good job.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, like, what do you think of the kind of the flow of each album?
Well, this album definitely has so many moments in it. I'm just thinking of the beginning of Dagger, where it's like it kind of almost goes completely silent, and then the single piano note. And it's like, it has so many of those type of moments to like flow between the songs. Not like that exact moment, obviously, but like really good starts, especially Allison just starting like wall of sound going in. It's so memorable that I feel like this album is just so well put together. And then of course if you add the bonus tracks in too, it's just like an extended awesome album, and it also ends just as well with what was that final bonus track?
Country Rain or something?
Yeah, like it's like, okay, interesting. Like they definitely thought about flow on this album. This album also, they really thought about flow, so it's hard to say.
I would say Loveless in general is the better flowing album, because this album I feel like is very hard to listen to as individual songs, because it almost to me feels like one long track with different movements to it. And some of the tracks have perfect transitions between each other too, where I'm like, I don't even know if I'm on the next song yet. Right? And so I think this album definitely is the more cohesive one overall. But that being said, we'll get to this later on. I feel like sometimes, it's too cohesive. Where it feels like
the songs don't pop out
a bit more separation would have been better to like get into it. Of course, listening to it more gets over that.
Yeah.
But when you're first getting into the album, I feel like this is a harder one because it feels like the songs blur together a bit. So this one, while maybe not having as good of a flow, I think actually they break up the flow a little bit in intentional ways, so that you kind of like some songs impact you more,
There's definitely more like variety that helps to break up the flow, just in how they do the sound, like we were explaining with Allison and 40 Days being more big songs, whereas you have Sing and Melon Yellow that are very, subdued and kind of...
almost a little bit more of a palate cleanser before you get into more intense song.
Yeah, and then of course Dagger at the end is like a very different song, deploying like piano and all these other and acoustic guitar. Yeah.
So like, the variety I think makes it so... Maybe the album doesn't technically flow as well, but I think it actually stays a more interesting listen in some ways. I gotta say, for transitions, my favorite transition on this album is when you go from Souvlaki Space Station, the kind of like really fuzzy, sort of like distorted outro to that song,
right,
where it kind of dissolves on itself, to just the cut into When the Sun Hits with that kind of like very, very subtle guitar and cymbals, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think this album maybe has more jarring transitions, but it works, you know?
Yeah.
Like, you can tell that the band did it on purpose.
Yeah, it's very different in how it flows. Like, this album has a lot of like between songs and all of that, or like at the end of most of the songs, they have like a little kind of different part that's completely different than the song, and like just like a little sample or like a little loop or something.
Yeah, like the first track,
and then they cut into a new song, and like
there's actually a lot of abrupt cuts in this album. But I think that, like, despite that, it flows so perfectly because it's almost like barely conscious, right? And then suddenly it's like there's like a flip of a switch, and you're like, oh, we're on something different, you know? Like, wakes you out of the dream.
A little bit, yeah.
And I really love those moments on this album. Like, what is it? The track "Blown a Wish" starts like almost like as if you cut in half a second into the song.
Yeah.
But that being said, the song it's coming from isn't necessarily very different instrumentally. Whereas this like has a lot of variety in that. But we'll get to variety as a category later on. But it does play into flow, right?
Yeah. I would, if we were to say which is better, I would say that this album probably has better flow.
It probably has the more...
Or better, I guess, consistency. Or
It's a more cohesive album experience. It also goes to say, because like this album, you wouldn't really add any tracks or take away any tracks from it. Whereas this has like, you can find it in multiple versions that have a various number of tracks added onto it. Whether you listen to it on vinyl, CD, or Spotify.
Yeah.
Personally, I like to listen to it with as many tracks as possible because I just like all the songs they made for this album and era.
And I do think that the variety is something you don't really find on the other albums.
Yes.
By this band.
Also
so
true.
like, I do like the variety. I think that actually sets this album apart from the other albums. But that's a different category. So.
Well, let's get into the third category, which is variety.
Cool.
Might as well, right?
Yeah.
So we kind of touched on this a little bit with the second category, but I think that definitely it's no contest that Souvlaki has the more variety on the album. Songs like Souvlaki Space Station are completely psychedelic rock explorations, and then songs like Allison or When the Sun Hits are more traditional, have a more pop structure, and then instrumentally you have variety in songs such as like 40 Days and Dagger, which are completely different in their instrumentation, right? So definitely that album, it's kind of no contest. But that being said, I think that this album didn't really need more variety. No. Like, it sticks to a sound that's one of the most unique sounds of any album ever, and it just explores that for 50 minutes. And I think that it's great that it does that. So
yeah, this album is like when you're having like a popsicle and then you just, or like ice cream or something, and you just like keep, I guess, eating it, and it's like you after a little bit you've kind of got the flavor of it, right? It's just kind of very sweet and very whatever, and then you just kind of enjoy it, like continuing eating that flavor. And then this one's more like a sundae with like 6 different flavors in it.
Sure.
And like they all work really well together, and like it's fun. But yeah, you are able to, I'm kind of done with vanilla. Oh, now I'm gonna have, I don't know, strawberry or something. And like you get that bit more variety, which I think does set this album apart. I like that.
And makes it a lot more approachable. Like, if you don't like the sound of the first few songs, you might actually really love the album by the middle of the album, because by that point there's some more catchy songs or different sound. And this one, if you don't vibe with the sound from like track 1, you're probably not going to enjoy this album.
I'm not exactly sure about that, because track 1,
Only Shallow,
right? Track
it does hit
Only Shallow
hard.
does hit really hard, and I feel like the album does mellow out a lot.
That's true.
So.
It does start out with quite a roar. That's for sure. So okay, maybe it's not fair to say by the first track, but a few tracks in, if you're like really not enjoying the sound of this album, like
if it's too noisy,
it's kind of what you get for the whole thing, right? So it's weird. I wouldn't call this album noisy. It is objectively noisy, but like the way that it's done feels like almost calming and almost soothing. It's so weird, right?
Well, it's noisy in a similar way to like how Tim Hecker is noisy. Yeah. Where it's very ambient and very almost easy listening, and very relaxing, but at the same time deploys a lot of dissonance and a lot of noise, like non-tonal instruments, I guess. Yeah. And has a lot of like, very background things going on that like are kind of hard to focus on because there's just, a haze.
When you play this and you turn up the volume, it almost feels like you're not turning up the volume. Like, volume almost means nothing when listening to this music. You listen to it really quietly or really loudly, I feel like it has the same sound. You know what I mean?
In some sense, it's like mastered to be very loud, like inherently.
It is, exactly. Like, apparently when the band plays live, they play like, they're one of the loudest bands you can hear. Like, it's like super, super maxed out. Yet the music they play is like very soft, very soothing. It's so weird, that combination, right? Because like other really loud bands, like, you think of like some metal bands, or you think of like early Swans, or even like any era of Swans, really. Like that's music that's loud and like hits hard, right? Like it's really like it's a punch in the stomach. And this music, I feel like, despite being loud, only Shallow really is the song that like feels like heavy, whereas the rest of it just feels like you're floating on a cloud. Yeah. So the fact that they use noise to such an effect, I think, is so brilliant. So anyway, variety, not so much on this album. This one definitely would win in that category, but again, they have different functions. So. Yeah. Fourth category is uniqueness and originality.
I think it's obvious who wins this one.
Yeah.
Historically, this like overshadowed this album just because it was so unique, right? Just because it had such a distinct sound that really, even in their future albums, they weren't really able to get. Like, this album is really standalone in its sound. And like, there have been other shoegaze kind of bands that have copied it in their own way, and like, those are cool in their own ways. But never have they really been able to copy the heart of this album. Yeah, it's so unique.
It's a one of a kind album experience. The genre, in a way, for many critics, peaked with this album. It's easy to see why.
And some people say this album killed the genre.
Yeah, exactly. So,
and like, though it's definitely still alive today.
It's alive today, but like definitely was really popular in the 90s, and it really declined by the mid 90s, I'd say.
I think also like the context of it in terms of the music that was big at that time. This album brings in almost grungy elements. Oh, and grunge was huge in that time. And so like, by bringing in those elements, it was almost like if you were to bring in those elements, I guess today in 2022, it wouldn't really make sense because grunge isn't really the big genre anymore, right? It wouldn't have that impact. And I don't think anyone could do it again.
Yeah, like in a way, it almost adds like violence to the beauty, right? That's inherent to like the kind of dream pop genre. Yeah. It takes like the kind of intensity and like abrasiveness of grunge, and it like perfectly makes it its own thing. Unquestionably the more unique one, even today. Like, I feel like there still hasn't been an album that sounds like this today. Yeah. So next is exploration and depth. So this is the extent at which the album really explores its kind of like core themes. That's actually a harder one.
Yeah, we discussed this earlier with how this expression is a lot more subtle. Yeah. Whereas this one is a little bit more like lyrical, I guess. I do feel like the themes in this one, I never really know what's going on thematically. Like, it might be a concept album and I wouldn't know. Like, the lyrics are more like vibe setters than like a story that they're telling, I think.
They just kind of paint a picture that reinforces the emotion of the song, right?
For sure, yeah.
Which is good. I think this is almost a tie, because this one obviously explores its sound to quite a great extent. Every track is a different texture, right? It's kind of a part of a greater whole of this unique sound that they're kind of crafting here, right? This album is more playing with different sounds per song, almost. Yeah. There's a few...
It's exploring it more holistically, like getting different angles of the sound. Exactly. Whereas this one does feel like it's getting the sound, it got the sound, and then it's just going for
almost
it, right?
Like and kind of pinpoint precision, just exploring that sound. Next would be complexity and technicality. That's an interesting one because it doesn't really apply as much to shoegaze as it does other genres. Like, these artists aren't trying to make complicated math rock. It's more about setting an atmosphere, which they both do really well.
Yeah, I would say that this is simpler music. Yeah. Just in how it's composed and like the instrumentation and the effects.
That's a very good point. I think production is probably what we should talk about for this category in terms of these albums. Yeah. And that this album was like a real labor of love. I know that a bit about the behind the scenes, that it took years for them to kind of perfect the production style that they wanted. Yeah. And that's why also they stopped making music basically after this, because the kind of main guitarist of this band, Kevin Shields, like, has a very particular sort of perfectionist mindset towards his guitar playing, and mostly in terms of the pedals effects production.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So maybe this album would win on that category.
Yeah, I think also just a lot of the composition in this album is definitely more like complex. There's a lot of thought put into it. So yeah, I would say that this album is more complex.
The way that sounds are layered against each other. I mean, it's very, like, it sounds messy when you listen to the album because of like the noise that's hitting your ears, I guess, but like, it is, when you like actually listen to it, really, really meticulously put together. Yeah. So one of the coolest things about it. And then the next thing would be production quality, professionalism. I mean, yeah, we just kind of talked about that. Like, this album has a very, very specific sort of production quality that it goes for. Definitely not a conventional one, though. No. But it nails it, right? Yeah. But I do think this album is really well produced.
I think it's probably one of the most clean and like easy to listen to shoegaze albums out there. And also the variety on it like helps with that because they can explore kind of different types of the production, like from that wall of sound to that really subdued sound to something like Dagger, which is almost more like an indie rock track. Yeah, it's like you get kind of different sides to it, but I feel like they really deploy what they want out of it, right? They really produce it in the way that expands the music in the ways they wanted. So
yeah, like while this one obviously has the more focused and unique and really masterful sort of style, I really love some of the songs on this album, almost specifically for their production. Like altogether, while not like a real fan favorite or popular song, it's just always been one of my favorites because I love the sort of like ambience that it has, and that's really due to the production style. It's just, it lets you just kind of like sit and soak in this just beautiful sort of ambience that they create, right? Yeah. And that really makes this album like stand out for me.
Yeah, on my guitar, on my like Zoom pedal, often I'll just throw on like headphones, like plug it in or whatever with headphones and just play and just have like the most ambient effects on. And it's really, in some sense, they just take that and then just put it in this album perfectly. Like it doesn't feel compressed or shrunk. It feels like really expansive and big.
As if it was like playing live.
Exactly, yeah. Which I think really adds to this album. Like if it didn't have that aspect, that would take away from the album a lot. So yeah, I think both of them would probably be a tie for that. They're produced in the ways that they need to be, right, for their sounds to be expressed how they want. So
absolutely. All right, the next category is return power. So, like, which album of the two draws you back to listen to it more often? And I would say for that, I would definitely say Souvlaki, because just the amount of time to listen to Souvlaki over this is insurmountable. That being said, I think I like the albums almost equally. It's just this has such a particular mood to it that I don't find myself going.
You have to be in the right headspace for this. Yeah, so I throw this one on every Valentine's Day.
Oh, nice.
It's always my Valentine's Day album.
That's a fun tradition.
Yeah. And so it's very specific when I listen to it. And like sometimes I'll be in the exact mood where, I don't know, I'm feeling heartbroken or just generally lonely or whatever, and then I'll throw this album on and it's perfect. But generally, this album, is definitely easier to throw on just any time.
Yeah.
Despite that, I probably do listen to them about equally.
Really? Okay.
Just because I don't listen to this one, I don't know. I'd rather listen to new music than throw on something that's easy listening. So that's probably the only reason why.
I just find that often I play this one, especially in rainy days.
Yeah. Rainy days are perfect. Very spring album.
Yeah. The last category is engagement. So this is an important category. Basically, for an album listen, it's very important to keep the listener's attention, right? And even I think some of the best albums sometimes don't do super well with engagement. You have to be really focused. Sometimes use a lot of brain power to like actually listen to the whole thing, even if it's really good. So I wonder what you think about these two albums in terms of engagement.
So I would say that both of them are tied for me for this, because whenever I start this album, I find myself finishing it and I'm like, this was too short.
Yes.
But this album, whenever I start it, it has enough variety in it that it keeps me engaged the whole time, and then I'm like sad at the end because it's like, oh, we're already at Dagger, and like, oh, okay, I just want this to continue, and then it does with the bonus tracks.
You listen to the extra tracks,
with the bonus tracks, but like, I don't know, I feel like this album, definitely keeps me listening. So both of them, I guess, do keep me listening very intently for the whole listen. Though I guess I do zone out a lot more with this album, but that's just kind of the point. That's kind of like what it's going for, is for you to kind of just get wrapped up in the haze of it, and then just find yourself, almost like high on the music.
Yeah,
it's very different.
It's intoxicating music. Like I find whenever I listen to Loveless and I start it, that first track really grabs me, and then from the second track onwards to the end, I get pulled in this like state of like basically utter relaxation and bliss, and it's almost like I fall asleep. And then when the album ends, I'm like, oh, and I feel like I just took a nap. Like it's like such a unique experience.
It is,
I think. Yeah. So is that engaging? I guess so.
Yeah,
in its unique way.
The thing is, do you ever feel bored or like you want to stop listening?
No,
never.
No, it's always like
these. I don't think.
Yeah, this is one of those albums that really sucks you in, and you kind of just want to keep listening until it's done. So they're both wins. I think. Like I would probably say Loveless edges it out a little bit, but I think that they're both really engaging listens from start to finish.
Yeah, very different for kind of different headspaces. So,
and both have, I'd say, no really weak tracks at all.
No, definitely not.
So overall, like by our little rubric here of categories, Loveless is the superior album.
Yeah.
But that being said, they're both amazing albums, and I would say that we wholeheartedly recommend both of them to anyone who hasn't heard them yet.
Yeah.
So and also I'd say if you've never heard shoegaze as a genre before, Both of these albums are absolute like classics in those genres. While this one probably gets more praise, I'd say that it's not a good thing to overlook Souvlaki and Slowdive in general as a band.
Yeah.
So thanks for watching. If you like this sort of series, we have some other ones coming up, like, talking about prog rock or 90s alternative or ambient or electronic. So, and if you have any suggestions of two kind of classic albums that you think would be interesting to see go head to head, let us know, because we'll consider it, especially if we know the albums. So,
yeah.
Thanks for watching, and see you next time.